Hi guys, welcome back to another video. Today I am going to do another movie review. I watched Donnie Darko again last night. I had originally seen it, I don't know, 10 years ago maybe. And I've even seen Darko, I think it's called, which was an I guess we'd say a sequel that wasn't done by the same people or whatever, which focused on the titular Donnie Darko's sister. I didn't think it was all that bad, but it's not received the same amount of attention and acclamation that the original Donnie Darko has garnered. Donnie Darko didn't make a lot of money. It barely broke even with its very small budget, and its budget was $4.5 million, and its box office was originally $7.5 million. So with advertising and so on, they say that you have to at least double your budget to break even. So this movie originally didn't break even, but I'm sure that in the time since then, with streaming and CD or DVD sales and so on, I'm sure it's made its budget back many times over, because it's become really quite a cult favorite, I suppose. So I want to talk about Donnie Darko, and this movie starred Jake Gyllenhaal, and his sister's in it too, Maggie, and it's interesting to see her so young. She plays a lot of middle-aged women these days, and Drew Barrymore plays a small role in it, as does Patrick Swayze, the late Patrick Swayze, and so it's interesting to see all these well-known names in there. So of course, since she hit her teenage years, I don't think Drew Barrymore has aged at all, and she plays a small role as a teacher in this movie. Small but not unimportant, as all of the minor characters contribute something significant to this movie. It's a very small number of actors, but they all contribute something. So the movie originally came out in 2001, and probably Donnie Darko's best known for its soundtrack. In fact, its eerie theme featured certain, even back then, vintage songs like there was a Duran Duran song featured in it, and it had, of course, Tears for Fears song Head Over Heels in there, which is an amazing song. But most famous, of course, is the Mad World song, which apparently was also written by Tears for Fears and sung by Gary Jules. This is the All Around Me Are Familiar Faces song, which has become a meme as well, because it's so depressive, but it's such an amazing song, and the soundtrack as a whole really facilitates the message of the movie. Okay, so what is the message of the movie? Okay, there's a basic either or. Okay, and we've seen this either or in a number of cases. Like, for instance, around the same time, or perhaps a bit after, was the movie Beautiful Mind, which discussed the famous economist who basically, I think he did win a Nobel Prize for economics, but was also a victim of mental illness, I think in his case schizophrenia. So the main character, played by Jake Gyllenhaal, is the character. Obviously, it's the titular character, Donnie Darko, and he comes from a family, the mother and the father, and he has two sisters, one older and one younger. This young Donnie is a high school student, and the instigating incident was a crash, an inexplicable crash of an airplane airplane engine, giant engine from like a 747 or something like that crashes on their house, and in fact lands in Donnie's bedroom. But Donnie, and this is in the middle of the night, but Donnie has been led out of the house by his, they originally they call it a sleepwalking, but he starts to see that eerie rabbit. Then the rabbit is named Frank, and this is, so the basic problem is set off right away. There are physical realities that beggar explanation, like where did that 747 engine come from? There was no flights that they could relate it to. The serial number was burnt off. When the FAA comes along and tries to figure out where this engine came from, they can't figure it out. The initial explanation given in the movie was that the sci-fi explanation is that there was a wormhole, and this movie's about time travel. So that's, on the one hand, that's the sci-fi explanation. The other explanation is mental illness and schizophrenia. Now, I suppose one could argue that it's not an either-or situation, but a both-and. Now, I love the movie, but I found it difficult to watch because I've encountered a great number of people with suffering from schizophrenia, and it's such a horrible infliction that and so many tragic things happen every day because schizophrenics are either undiagnosed or they're not given enough care, hands-on care. Our culture doesn't know what to do with schizophrenics. Most of them live on the streets. This is I would say most of the people who have always been homeless are male schizophrenics. Of course, now with fentanyl and so on, that number is probably being drowned out by people with drug addictions. And again, the two don't necessarily have to be an either-or situation. That many schizophrenics self-medicate, of course, with drugs, cocaine, heroin, meth, and so on. So, it's interesting that when you have no stake in a movie, that you're able to take a step back and sort of look at it more objectively. But I really believe that in my lengthy experience with people suffering from schizophrenia, both extended family, friends more or less close, and the time I've spent working with street people, that it's not a subject that I can look at purely objectively. So I find myself inclined to say we can't allow these alternative explanations to interfere with proper diagnosis and medication and care for people suffering from mental illness. So a part of me wants to say that this movie is irresponsible in that it entertains these side explanations. So again, if you refer back to, for instance, the movie A Beautiful Mind, there's an attempt by the main character to explain his inner state, but with external reasons. The FBI or somebody's after him, and he begins to look for, because he's a mathematical mind, he begins to look for patterns in things. Now, the movie doesn't really give much credence to that naturalistic explanation, whereas Donnie Darko, I feel at times that Donnie Darko does too much. Now, it would be unfair to say that the movie is celebrating Donnie Darko as a healthy man, young man. It doesn't go that far. So in any case, the sci-fi explanation for the events of the movie doesn't is never used to vindicate the state and the mental state, the healthiness of Donnie Darko. Um, it's a bit jarring and worrying at times that Donnie, as happens way too often now, that guns and mental illness are not being cordoned off from each other enough. And I'm a massive guns rights person, but I think only a fool would say that there wouldn't have to be important regulations regarding the access of firearms to those who suffer mental illness. I see too many of these school shootings and so on are simply gasoline and fire. So mental illness plus firearms. So, but on the other hand, it's interesting that Donnie Darko does most of his damage with fire and water. So it's said that he burned down a building in his youth. That wasn't featured in the movie, but it's referred to. And in the movie itself, he burns down a house. Nobody's injured, but it's the Patrick Swayze character's house, and that ties into a sci-fi or naturalistic explanation too, because in the meantime, as a result of the fire, the police discover something very troubling, very dark about this Patrick Swayze character. So again, anytime we have the sci-fi explanation, we have the mental illness possibility alongside, and vice versa. So I think in a proper defense of the movie, it doesn't go so far as to say, well, maybe Donnie Darko was healthy after all. There's no sense of that. He's a sick and troubled young man, but he might also be experiencing all these supernatural or science fiction occurrences. So that is the basic dynamic. So the watcher, the viewer, is constantly confronted by the essential question: is any of this really happening, or is this all in Donnie's mind? Now, I think the way that the excellence of the movie consists in how that is handled, yeah, but the excellence of the movie also is in the presentation of the characters in the movie. There's no exaggeration. There's no boring, annoying use of tropes. Let's take, for instance, the example of the Drew Barrymore character. Now, the Drew Barrymore character is, at first, the trope of the young, enthusiastic, idealistic English teacher who, she says at one point, she wants to save her students from apathy. Okay, but it's not an exaggerated thing. She's not a crusader like we find so often in these stupid movies, crusaders of the young rebel against the frumpy old people, which was such a part of, for instance, 80s cinema. And you can think of movies like Scent of a Woman, and that was just so repetitive in the 80s. Was that trope, or The Breakfast Club, So the character that Drew Barrymore plays says a lot more through expression and the few words she says than could ever be said by this pandering, meandering, verbose presentation that you'd find from some teacher today on YouTube telling you how she's saving the kiddos from the system or whatever, wherein she is the worst. She constitutes herself the worst part of the system. So when you look at a case like that, there's a science teacher, and the science teacher, he's not this inherit the wind character of science knows everything and religion is stupid and closed-minded. There are lots of characters who play on that basic dynamic between science and religion, or faith and reason, what have you. But it's sometimes done comically, but it's never heavy-handed, because the fact is that no matter what, if we side with like the sneering atheist, like the Richard Dawkins or whatever, the sneer, or the Bertrand Russell, this sneering superior attitude of the scientific person, well, what's the casualty? The casualty is Donnie Darko, who doesn't get a sympathetic, caring ear. So you do have that play between science and religion, or science and that other side of life, mysticism or what have you, and they integrate and they pull apart, and in a way that's very, that's really quite makes for quite an enriching viewing experience. So let me talk for a bit now about a few of the events and a few of the characters, and see what in fact we can tease out, if there's anything like a message or a meaning. The final result of the movie, as I understand it, is that Donnie, for all his faults and failings and his irresponsible and illegal and unethical actions, his final act is a heroic act of self-sacrifice, and it's not trumped up in any obvious way, because if you follow it, and it kind of only works if the both and is true. So eventually Donnie seems to realize that he can reverse this unfortunate, tragic series of events if he goes back and allows the plane engine to fall on him and kill him. So what is the rabbit trying to do, Frank? Is the rabbit an expression of Donnie's psychosis? Is it an expression of his subconscious? Is this all in his mind, as you know, a moment's dying imagination? You know, those few last thoughts you have as your life slips from you. The heroic self-sacrifice only works if the sci-fi is true. Okay, so Donnie sees this series of tragic events, and it seems like he finally understands what it all means for him. And basically it means that he has to basically sacrifice his own life for the sake of another person. So, and that's his love interest in the movie, young woman he meets. And it's interesting how every character in the story has their own imperfections, their own struggles, and you know, the way it's handled in terms of the script and character development and acting is extraordinary, because less confident or less expert directors and actors would exaggerate, because they wouldn't have confidence in their audience to pick up on these things. And this is something that I've found in my writing, and for instance in my novel, you're constantly asking yourself, is this obvious enough for the reader or the audience to get? So someone who wants to do something more than generic bad movies or books has to have faith in their audience, that the audience is going to pick up on the subtle clues. And if it's the doing of the director or the scriptwriter or both, I don't know, but that's in what the genius of the movie consists. It's in the light touch of implication. Okay, so and again, this can fit into writing poetry or in painting. A light hand of suggestion. Okay, so for instance, a painter starting out would be tempted to use blacks and whites, to really present the shadows in a way that says they don't have confidence in the ability of the texture of the work as a whole to indicate shadow and light. So dark blacks and unmixed whites, I would say, are a sign of an amateur artist who doesn't have confidence in the power of color and layout and the power of the unified picture as a whole to convey the feeling. Okay, so as I said, in the case of Drew Barrymore's character, so it's the case with for instance, his love interest, who is who comes to the school. She is running away from her and her mother have run away from an abusive husband or father or whatever, and they've come to this town, basically whatever, in October. So school usually starts in the US in late August, I guess. So they're coming partway through the school year. And, it's your typical school. There's some bullies and there's some people who are bullied, but it's never exaggerated. It's never in that formulaic television or teen comedy or teen movie type exaggeration. But nevertheless, these things are present because one of the tasks of the movie is to show that everybody is affected, I think, by life's dark moments or life's imperfection. I'm tempted to want to say that this movie is very modern and existential and all that stuff, but I'm going to refrain from that because I don't think it would serve our purposes to go too general and all that. But I think that in exploring these characters, for instance, in the girl who's his love interest. Okay, so the love interest is the young woman named Gretchen, and she's played by Jenna Malone. Jenna Malone, you'd know her face, and she's been in a million things. So in the case of this Gretchen character, she's experienced tragedy in her life. She says that her mother was stabbed by her father or by her stepfather, or whomever it was. But and she's quiet-ish, but she's a girl who is very interesting in that her principal characteristic, I think, in the short, sort of limited number of brushstrokes that have been given to her character, her character is someone who is looking for special moments, sensitivity, and meaning in her life. And so that just goes to show that the Donnie Darko character, for all the bad things he does, he also has a very sensitive, caring nature, and that's really the final word on Donnie Darko is that he does in the end sacrifice himself for Gretchen. Okay, so in that interplay between between good and evil that runs through Donnie and that runs through, everyone in this town, that in the end, Donnie Darko's character ends up to be a good person, right? So, and I've mentioned the teachers and so on. There is some play on the basic hypocrisy of people in power, and the way it's presented is that, yes, there's a lot of shortcomings, and the tragedy of life, basically, it comes about because people aren't able to be present enough to each other. And the reason for that is that everybody has their own stories, right? Everybody has their own, as Christians would say, everyone's carrying their own cross. So it's very difficult to help someone with their cross because everyone's got their own they're carrying. And so that's it's not that there's tons of blame to go around. And there can be false sympathy, as one character has false sympathy for really the only evil character in the book, or in the movie, which turns out to be the Patrick Swayze character. There's false sympathy or harmful sympathy for him at one point. But in the end, and that's the thing, and that's one of the lasting messages or implications with Donnie, is that something that should be so easy to do, that is care for a schizophrenic, which his parents try to do. They send him to a counselor. The counselor seems to be visited frequently, if not daily. He's given medication. It's at one point the sister tells on him to the parents and say he's not taking his medication, and then the parents say, take some, and then ultimately later on the doctor reports, or said the psychiatrist reports to the parents that she talks about these daytime visions are a sign of schizophrenia. Okay, I think that's the only time the word schizophrenia is said in the whole movie. So the parents hear those words, and it affects them. And one of the most interesting moments in the movie is, so you get this feeling that he's not, sufficient care isn't being taken for him in his medical condition. And he says at one point to his mother, he says, what does it feel like to have a freak or something like that as a son? And the mother unhesitatingly says, it's wonderful. So this isn't a case of exaggeration. Like, we know that there's lots of suffering in the world, and that there's real evil people out there who not only wouldn't help someone with their problems, but would exacerbate them with punishment and retribution and all that stuff. And there are characters, there are people that fail Donnie, like the principal, but there are many characters, or in the FCC, but there are characters that are really there for him, his parents, the psychiatrist, Gretchen, and even his sister, who is typical young lady. She sneaks out at night, and then they throw a party at the house, but she's not one of these exaggerated, just purely superficial and vain sisters who doesn't care about anything but herself. So there's none of that in the movie, or I should have said there's very little in the movie like that. Exaggerated tropes, exaggerated caricatures. So that's the thing. And now, because we don't have those easy solutions, the movie is at times difficult to watch because it really draws out the tragedy. It's like watching you feel like at times you're watching an accident in slow motion. Okay, take for instance, in this regard, captions are put on the movie, or I don't know what the technical name is, but you're told that Frank says, the rabbit says that everything's going to end, the world's going to end in 30 days. So that's the start of October, and the running out, the 30 days ends on October 30th. And you're updated here and there, and you're told 20 days left, and you're told whatever, 10 days left, 6 days left, 3 days left, 1 day left, 6 hours left. And that's part of the slow, watching the accident in slow motion, that I found difficult to watch in that way, that it was almost like a movie spending too long, for instance, focused on the suffering of a cancer patient or something like that, drawing out the agony too long, right? And now there's ways to do that. The for most people, unwatchable movie Martyrs draws out torture to a very great extent, a very great length. I really liked the movie, but I could understand how people would feel that way. And the outrageous and yet hilarious Centipede movies, same thing. You can feel at times that this is just too much. It just shows too much of this savagery, right? It's different with Donnie Darko in that the savagery is your sense of impending doom, what's going to happen on the 30th, because these are characters you like. You like Donnie. You like his family. You like Gretchen. You like the school teachers. Several of the minor characters you like. So it has that feel, and this is not a movie you would watch over and over again. And as I said, it's probably been 10 years since my previous watch, and I probably won't watch it for another 10 years. And it's because that it's a difficult movie to watch. Like Braveheart is difficult to watch, or Saving Private Ryan is difficult to watch. It takes a lot out of you. And for me, of course, Revenge of the Sith is difficult to watch. And every time they show the lightsaber duel between Anakin and Obi-Wan, it's hard for me to watch. I've got a lot of emotions invested in that. And so same with Donnie Darko, you care about these characters. In the end, there is a subtly stated redemption. And now you have to work it out in your mind and say, okay, this is what this meant. That he chose to do the good thing. He chose the Christ-like self-sacrifice. And that's the redemption. That there's suffering in the world, and every character in here suffers, but that there is a redemptive aspect. And that is that we can still lift another person's burden or weight or tragedy and take it on ourselves, right? So this is a haunting movie, and yet excellent. Like any tragedy. I'm thinking about Crime and Punishment. You know it's going to end badly for the main character, but nevertheless, you want to accompany them on their journey, right? And that's the difference here, that the screenwriters or the directors made you care about the characters, and so it's not in unbridled suffering for the viewer, right? So I recommend the movie to mature audiences, and it's not because there's any nudity or violence, or there's a little bit of violence, not much, nothing like that, but that it is very weighty. It's heavy on the heart, this movie, but nevertheless, I think this is one of the things that's the importance of tragedy, and I think this movie would fit into that general classification as tragedy, and tragedy is when bad things happen to good people, and that tragedy serves an important service to humanity. It makes us sympathetic to other people, right? If life was just a comedy, we wouldn't have personal growth, right? So anyway, I recommend the movie to you if you're a mature audience and if you're not having a bad day. So all the best to all of you, and happy viewing, and we'll talk to you again real soon.